Hello and welcome to From Impossible to Inevitable. I am your host, Megan Bauer. Thank you so much for joining me today and pushing play on today's episode. This is episode 130, and it is kind of a follow-up to last week's episode 128 on definitions. So if you feel a little bit lost, I'm going to do my best to make this its own separate thing. But know that this is kind of a part two, to talking about definitions. Just as a quick overview, last week we talked about definitions, like the definitions we hold about ourselves and who we are and the things that we do and how that influences our behavior, how that influences how we show up, how that influences so many things, our results, what we create, how we interact with people. These definitions that we hold about ourselves. And while all of that is true, I stand by all of that. This episode is really about encouraging you to be very choosy about your definitions and being very aware to not over-identify, which could be a thing, is a thing as well. Because we can choose to over-identify with what it is we do, like our career or our place in life or whatever. We can choose to way over-identify who we are and what that thing, what that situation, what that behavior, what that means about us. And it doesn't have to be that way. This is kind of how when people are, become empty nesters. Non-empty nesters. This is not from experience, obviously, but I've heard about this. They kind of don't know what to do with themselves, particularly the women, the mothers, the caregivers, the nurturers. Oftentimes, I'm generalizing, that's like, well, what do I do now, or when we've had kids in the house for, years because they've been little and then all of a sudden everyone's at school all day and it's like, well, what do I do now? Like, it can be kind of an identity shake. I mean, I did have this kind of identity shake when I had my first daughter and my whole life changed overnight. But we can over-identify with the roles that we play, with the things that we do, with careers even. I've heard this happening with people when they have career changes or when they retire and they're not that thing anymore. They don't do that thing every day. They don't show up to that place every day. And it's like, well, who am I now? Right? This is kind of, they've over-identified with what they do, with who they are, who their being actually is. So while, yes, have your definitions about yourself and, how you show up, what you do, how you create, how you contribute, be very careful at the same time to not over-identify. Don't make anything mean too much about you. And this is with the positive as well as the negative. We can choose to over-identify negatively as well. In the last episode, I talked about my current struggle of overcoming of not being good enough or not doing a good enough job or it's not good enough. But it always follows, like, it starts with it's not good enough and it always ends with I'm not good enough. And when I get to I'm not good enough, I'm over-identifying with whatever it is. I'm way 100% over-identifying with whatever it is that is lacking. That, or at least that I am perceiving is lacking, because sometimes I will think it's not good enough and Jake or the girls or whoever or whatever are like, what are you talking about? This is great. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's not good enough. This is so beyond good enough. But when I get to the I am, whatever, that is a huge red flag. I am over-identifying. And I can recognize that. I do recognize that. I see that, actively working on changing it. For the effort of transparency, right? For the effort of connection, I share that with you, that I feel like sometimes what I do, never good enough. It's not good enough. And it always, or almost always, ends with I'm not good enough, right? This is the thing that I'm actively working on changing my definition and my story and my perspective around And of course, I'm going to do things that aren't, I could have done better. I could have done more. I could have done whatever. And yeah, maybe they won't be good enough. However, that never ever needs to get to the point of I'm not good enough. I never need to identify to that level. And you don't as well, because you don't. Because I feel like as human beings, as we are striving to be as best as we can be, as we are striving to be better, as we are striving to improve ourselves, and that's the whole point of this podcast, right? We're striving to improve ourselves. We're striving to improve what we do, how we show up. We're, our life, whatever it is, whatever our goals are, we're striving for something. And as we are striving, I feel like we are doing the best that we can, trying to be a good human, trying to, create goodness in the world, trying to contribute positively to the world. That is my hope. That is the hope that my content draws in people of this nature that just want to contribute to the goodness of the world, that aren't looking for. I really hope I don't resonate with anybody who's looking to just create mass hysteria and chaos and everything like that, because all of my content is so enthusiastically encouraging on becoming the best you can be for you and the world. And so I would never want to encourage anyone to really personalize anything and over-identify with anything that is so detrimental as I'm not good enough, or I'm not deserving, or I'm not worthy, or anything like that. And we can easily get there. We can easily over-identify there. So whatever it is that you're creating, even as a podcaster, right? Like, I hesitate to say that I am a podcaster, because what if someday I decide not to podcast anymore? Well, then am I going to go through this definition shift, this identity shift? Like, okay, well, I was a podcaster, but now I'm not anymore. So then what? But instead, it's like, I have a podcast, like I host a podcast, and that there's some space there. I'm not over-identifying with that, right? For a long time, I am a creative, and I feel like creativity is very integral to who I am. But if there comes a point, honestly, I don't even foresee a point of not ever being creative, because that is so, so broad. I can be creative with writing. I can be a creative thinker. I can be a creative, with artwork. I can be, there's so many ways to be creative that is one that I'm really not afraid to hold on to. But think about that. Think about that very carefully, how close you want to identify with whatever it is your definition is, however it is that you want to, whatever it is you really want to embody. How close do you want that to be? Because there are things that you do, that there are just things that you do. They're not who you are. They're just what you do. There's situations that you find yourself in that you are not that situation. This is just the situation, and you are a human being in that situation, doing the best you can, trying to figure it out, learning, growing, stumbling, getting back up and doing it all again. But none of those things have to mean anything about you and who you are. And more importantly, none of them have to mean anything about your potential, right? We tend to go on this journey of life with our past informing our future, right? This is why we learn history in schools, right? So that we can be aware of the pitfalls of the past and do better in the future. We can figure out what works before and do better, continue to improve upon that. But in our day-to-day lives, we usually use our past experiences to inform the future. However, they are very distinct. You can use your past experiences to inform your future so long as it serves you, knowing that you can wake up tomorrow and make a different choice. You can wake up tomorrow and completely change whatever it is. Like I shared in my previous podcast, if I woke up tomorrow and decided I was done with my morning ritual, I could make that choice. That wouldn't be earth-shaking to our family or anything like that. I mean, they'd care. Jake would be a little like, what are you doing? And it would be fine. But I could make other big choices, right? Like I could make, while everybody was gone during the day, I could overhaul the house and I could just take everything to Goodwill and, they could come home and be like, what did you just do? And I could do that. That sounds really frightening and it's not really a thought of mine. But what I'm saying is just because I have a gray couch in my living room right now, and I will probably have a gray couch in my living room tomorrow, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't one day have a navy couch in my living room. I get that's a really simplified example of what I'm saying here. But to go deeper is just to say, because I am working on telling myself, that about being good enough, that I'm working on that today, doesn't mean I can't one day or tomorrow even break through and just have this foundational knowledge of I am good enough. I can create that tomorrow. I can step into that every time, every day. Just because I'm struggling with it today doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to struggle with it tomorrow. Just because I'm in this situation today doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be in that situation tomorrow. And we can change that. We can totally change that. We can make a new situation. Just because I'm in this neighborhood right now doesn't mean I can't move out of this neighborhood tomorrow even. And yes, all of these like flags go out in my head. Say, Megan, what do you mean you can't be here tomorrow? Of course you'd be here tomorrow. Because even if you were to buy a new house and sell tomorrow, all of the logistics make my head crazy. But down at the core, what I'm saying is if it was like life or death, I could wake up someplace else tomorrow. You have that power. You do. So just because you're where you're at now, that just because this is the situation you are now, does not need to be tied to your identity. It's not who you are, it's where you are. It's not who you are, it's just what you do. It's not who you are, that's just how you're making money. That's not who you are, it's just the situation you're in. So don't over-identify with any of these things. They don't need to mean anything about you. They don't need to mean anything about your future. Just because you are where you are now doesn't mean that you can't make changes to be somewhere else, to do something differently, to have a different life, a different perspective, a different way you even talk to yourself tomorrow. I was at my daughter's school over the weekend. There was a chess tournament and we were in the gym, and I don't spend a whole lot of time in the gym, but there are all these like motivational posters all around the gym and I loved it. And one of those that really stuck out to me is something along the lines of, what you do today creates your tomorrow, right? So if you make the different choices today, you'll have a different tomorrow. And luckily, as humans, we tend to do this slowly. We tend to not overhaul things just like randomly. I mean, people who we engage in life with who do this, who just like make huge overhauls overnight, we would probably label them as unstable, and we would be very wary of them because we don't quite know what to expect. But we tend to do this slowly, which is great. It's great for everyone because, you turn up the heat slowly. But you can do it. You can do it. You're not ever stuck in one thing. You're not ever stuck in one way of thinking about yourself. You're not ever stuck in one situation. You can slowly or quickly, whatever it is, change the situation, change how you speak with yourself, change your definition of yourself, and change to detach from whatever that you have over-identified with when you realize that you are over-identifying. Yes. Yes, that feels complete. Okay, thank you for joining me today on this episode. I love sharing the kind of behind the scenes of these episodes, which often is more like what's happening in Megan's head. That's really the behind the scenes of these episodes. And this was kind of an unplanned episode. But as I was writing the show notes for episode 128 on definitions, I was like, ooh, buddy, Megan, you left a big gap here. You left a real big gap here. And this needs to be said. this needs to be said that yes, you get to choose your definitions, and you need to be wary of over-identifying with other things. You need to be wary of over-identifying with things that don't need to be part of your identity. Some things are just things that you do. Some things are just things that you love. Some situations are just situations that you're in, and it doesn't have to mean anything about you. It doesn't have to be part of your core identity. That should be very carefully chosen. That should be very carefully cultivated. And yeah, so that's the behind the scenes on this episode. I was kind of was not intentional. Okay, no, wait. I very intentionally recorded this episode, but I did not wake up this morning thinking I was going to record this episode. And I love how that just works, and I love how that just happens. Anyways, I send you all of my love. Until next time, bye for now.